Hey guys, I thought I would do I'd do a quick video about something that I get questions on from friends and things when it comes to body work and stuff. But one of the biggest things that is kind of hard to understand is what grit sandpaper to use. You see all this stuff about different grits all the time. There's more than one way to skin a cat, obviously, but that stuff I feel like gets lost in translation sometimes. I'm in 2K primer, I'm using this and that, and I'm going to use 1,000 grit or something, there's 800 and stuff. For what I generally do, which is hot rod stuff, I don't do collision work or anything like that. But even with that, I think this kind of what I do works. If you like what I'll explain to you, you can use it. If not, don't use it. But you want, before paint, you want coarse enough grit, which is, causes scratches in your material for your paint and products to cling on to. If you sand it down too slick, a stiff wind will come and blow it off like a sheet of paper, for instance. So with that said, I want to do a bigger video when, and it might be pretty soon, where this stuff is in guide coat. I got this car pretty flat, so I would like to kind of show some, if I run into some issues on this thing, maybe I'll show some guide coat, what it does, different things. Where I'm in 400, I'm using 400 grit right now, but quick and dirty, here we go. Get your pen and paper out. This is kind of what you need to think about. Epoxy primer is not a primer. It's not a primer. It is, but don't think of it as a primer. A primer is something that you can sand down to level and take out imperfections and things. That's kind of like a body fill for your body work. Think of epoxy as what the name is, epoxy. It's kind of a, it's kind of like glue, I guess you could say. It's something that you don't really want to sand. It clogs your sandpaper up, so it's a wet on wet application for me. So what I use epoxy for is when I have bare metal, I like to kind of hit it with a coat of that or two, just to hiding or something, before I put body fill or primer on or whatever. It seals the metal off from everything rust. You can't stop anything from rusting, but it does seal the metal off from corrosion, and it protects the metal. And you also, if there's something that you can't sand or get to or what have you, it kind of helps you out a little bit, with adhesion and stuff too. So that's what I use it for. I use it for that. I usually hit the car that's all metal. I'll hit it in a coat or two in epoxy, before I start laying stuff down on it, like body fill, and, that way it don't also rust. Now, you can rough up epoxy, but it's not really made to be leveling anything out. I also use epoxy as a sealer. A sealer, something that you shoot on a finished car before you paint it as a value shade to get it one color. Sealer is nothing more than a thin, cheap paint. That's not a sealer primer. I don't even like the name primer when it comes to sealer, because it's not a primer. You're not sanding that down to level and fill in scratches or anything like that. That's just a value shade. I don't even use sealer. I use epoxy as a sealer because it's another level of protection. No, it's not as cheap, but that's good stuff. It helps everything adhere if you somehow miss something. But also protects everything underneath of it from, some maybe corrosions type things through the years. So I use epoxy over top of the 2K primer. That's already blocked off. And then I shoot base clear, wet on wet right over it after it flashes off, or urethane, whatever you're using. That's what I use epoxy for. Polyester primer is a primer. It is a high build primer. That means it's basically a body filler. Now, I like the polyester primer because it dries hard like plastic and it does not shrink. You can pour 2K in a cup and let it harden, and a polyester surfacer or primer in a cup, and when the 2K hardens, it shrinks, and the polyester does not. But another thing is, you can do all your body work and hit it with a polyester primer, and then if you start blocking that out and you see some lows and different things, you can add body filler right on top of it and not even worry about it being weak, because it's basically the same thing. It's plastic. That's what polyester is. That is something that you're leveling out, and in my opinion, if you have a lot of welding and body work and filler and different things going on, that's what I'm going to spray on top of it, polyester. Throw 3 heavy coats, or like a gallon, or even 2 on the car, and block her down. Guide coat it, block it down to flat. And it also kind of locks all your body work together, so if it's sitting in the hot sun, you don't see things expanding and contracting, and you get different lines and different surfaces and things going on. It kind of locks that body work down. Now, collision work, you wouldn't be using that polyester stuff. You just shoot it with the 2K and continue on. But that's what polyester is basically sprayable body filler. And then you got 2K primer, which is a lot easier sanding primer. But there's a reason for that, because it's a lot softer. It's not a hard, deal. You don't use it to level that much. You use it for imperfections, pinholes, scratches. It'll level a little bit, but you don't want to use that as a leveler, because it's not plastic like the polyester primer is. And you sand it and block it to the stage of ready for paint, sealer or epoxy, and then paint it. I think I went on a tangent about different primers, but we'll get back to sandpaper grit. So when I got a car that I'm going down to metal with, and I'm preparing to put body filler down, I'm usually going to use a 40 grit sandpaper, 40, scratch it up. Those scratches are basically like little pieces of rock and things over a cliff. If you're falling over the cliff, you need something to grab onto. Well, that's what your body fill needs, is a rough surface to grab onto. Now, obviously, 40 grit, you can't do a finishing touch with 40 grit or 80 or anything like that because of the scratches, how rough it is, but that's what that 40 is, what I use on your metal to get it ready for body fill, So then, let's say I got the body fill down and everything like that, and I'm doing my body work. I'm going to use 40 grit first to shape that panel, get it back flat into shape. If I need a lot of material removed, I'm going to go right to the 40. I'm going to hit it with 40. When it gets, and you got to obviously leave some room to go down to 80 grit So I'll get it kind of looking kind of close, then I'll go to 80 grit. Get that thing shaped. When you're shaping body fill and flattening, when you're shaping and flattening material, you want sharp sandpaper, a sharp piece of sandpaper. You go to 220 or 180, 220, you can straighten stuff out with like 180, but you're talking about soft primer or something. If you find an issue, you go down to 180 or something, and then step back up to T2400 or whatever you're doing. But when you go, in my opinion, when you go past 80 grit sandpaper, you have moved beyond the realm of straightening, flattening into polishing. You're doing nothing but removing scratches and imperfections. You're not flattening the bodywork at all. So you'll see a car that's got a nice paint job. You look down the side of it, you're like, ooh, looks horrible. It's got waves in it, stuff. Well, they might have put the body fill to it. They might have straightened it all out and, probably even removed all the guide coat when they blocked it out, but it's still wavy because they're using like 220, 400, or even finer grit. Well, all that's doing is polishing. It's not going to remove the highs in your primer or your body fill or nothing. It's not sharp enough paper. It's just going to glide over it and polish it and make it slick. It's not sharp enough paper to level things. So 40 and 80. Now, on something like this, you've got welding and different things going on when you're building a hot rod, doing a lot of metal work and things. I like that polyester primer to go with. So what I'll do is it's 40 grit, 80 grit, and I'll even use guide coat without no primer on it. I use guide coat to make sure I got everything as flat as I can, shaped and flat. And then I'll go straight to polyester primer, hit the whole car. Now, a lot of people are like, you got to go to 220 grit, before primer, because that, the sand scratches will show through that primer, and 80 grit's too deep a scratch as well. That polyester primer will take care of the 80 grit scratches. Trust me, it will do it. So I'm not going to spend my time doing another stage when I can take care of it with the primer. That's what primer does. If I can shoot primer on that thing and take care of the scratches, I ain't going to block it again with a finer grit. I'm done at 80. And I'll throw at least 3 coats. I'll hammer it. Even on this one, I did like a gallon and a half with the polyester. And then most of that's going on the floor. Don't even start blowing me up on comments. We're just, I'm just talking about sandpaper, primer. Most of that goes to the floor. You guys know it. If you think it doesn't, you don't know what you're doing. You need to do some more learning. But when you block that down with the poly takes care of the 80 scratches, I'll go to a 220. Now, if I got a real wavy panel, let's say on my guide coat, it's showing low spots pretty bad, I'll go back to an 80 real quick to take the material off to get down to where I'm flattening the panel. Then I'll get back to 220. So I'll flatten a car in 220, sometimes a 180. I consider a 180 just a little bit sharper than the 220. I'll use a 180 or 220, whatever. But I have both. 180 cuts a little quicker, but whatever. 180, 220, whatever. That little stage, I'll block that thing completely flat. That's what the guide coat, removing all the issues you have. And then at that point, when I have it and I'm happy, if you're not happy, you bust through the primer. You'll have to hit her again, Bubby. Hit her again with another couple coats and block her again. Because I really don't want stuff showing through that polyester primer. I mean, when it gets closed, it's closed, but you don't want to burn right through it. That's 220. Now, there's people I've seen that they'll go ahead and scratch that same primer down with 400 and maybe even 600 and paint it. But I find that polyester is really hard to sand, or it's a lot harder to sand. And along with, you get little pinholes in primer like you do and different things. I'll take care of the pinholes with regular lightweight body fill on that. But I find that when I get the 220, if I give 2 or 3 coats of the 2K primer, where it's a finer primer, it will help me out quite a bit in the progress of the car instead of just staying with the polyester primer. Anyway, I may be rambling, but I'm doing best I can. Like I said, take notes when you hear something makes sense. And at the end, I'll give a real quick summary. I'll try to write it down. .220 will be ready to spray with 2K primer. Okay, hit her with 3 coats. Don't be scared of putting too many coats on there because it takes what it takes. I don't care. Oh, you're putting too much primer. Yeah, no. You can't flatten the car out. You can't work the car down to where it needs to be without the material there. If you don't have the material, you can't use it. That's what it's for. Okay, so hit her with 3 coats of 2K or so or whatever after that. And you're going to start scratching on that with 400 grit. Block it down with the guide coat, 400 grit. Flatten it all out. Do what you got to do. You see pinhole or scratch, you can use glazing putty or whatever you're going to do. Get her flat down and nice, perfect with 400 grit. Now at that point, you may be ready for paint. So if you're using like a urethane, regular one stage, or not one stage, but urethane paint, buddy, I'd go ahead and hit her. Hit her with that 400. I like to go as rough as I can with sandpaper before paint as I can, because it won't chip as bad if something hits it or what have you. You got to give your material something to grab onto. So 400 is good for like urethane, regular paints and stuff. Now, if you want a base coat, clear coat, which I like base clear, and that's what I'm doing to this car, you're going to go one step further and block it down to 600. Especially, you could do 400 on base clear. I've done it, no problem. But they say, and I agree, 600 for base clear. So another thing that 600 will do better for you than 400 is when you shoot a metallic color, a base, or even maybe a urethane. But your metallic flakes, your metal flakes in your paint, they're what they are. They're metal flakes, so they're in the paint laying around. Right? They're just going to lay in there. And if you got 400 scratches in base clear, you run the risk of those metallic metal flakes laying in them scratches and not quite flowing inside the the liquid base clear, or the liquid base paint, and reflecting as nice. They can hit scratches and lay weird, and maybe even follow a scratch that you couldn't see or find enough. And when that sun hits it, it ain't going to look as great. It's not going to, the flakes ain't going to stand up. You kind of want the flakes to, instead of laying flat, you want them to kind of lay all every which way. That's what makes metallic so awesome looking. So 600 is what I'm going to go with on this, because I'm base clearing it 600. I know like a lot of people say 800 and 1,000 and stuff. I don't personally, I've never had the need to do that. There are places for grits like that, but if you're talking about just getting the car ready to go and shoot it, 600's good. It won't be what we like to call a chipper. You don't want one to chip real easy. That's enough to make you mad. So give your coating something to grab onto. It's about adhesion. It's my opinion. And yeah, you can really lay down a nice gloss, a nice paint job on that. It don't need to be 800 or 1,000. I mean, you can go 1,000, 1,200, and 1,500 and stuff on top of your collar or your clear coat if you got an issue to flatten down, or your collar sanding it, and or you rub down your clear coat for a flow coat of clear coat, or whatever. That's not what we're talking about right now. Just staying the perspective, giving you perspective on what we're talking about. We're talking about getting this car painted. So, now when I say wet on wet means, you spray, for instance, epoxy over your 2K because you're getting ready to paint. You let it completely dry, flash off, which means the solvent escapes the substrate. It kind of, 20 minutes, 40 minutes. It's in your technical data sheet, which you should be following pretty close. You got to let that flash off. And then you can just take your collar or base coat or your urethane paint, whatever you're doing, and directly spray right over it. You ain't got to sand it. That's what wet on wet means. Wet on wet means switching to another coat of a different product without having to sand the substrate that it's going on. That's what wet on wet is. So I guess real quick, I'll tell you that what I'm going to do is 400, 600, a coat or two of epoxy primer as a sealer, whatever. I don't have to go 2-3 coats. It's not about film buildup. It's about hiding. I want to hide what's underneath. I want this all uniform color. Let it kick off real good, which means dry to, whatever the sheet says, like 40 minutes or something. You could go an hour. The sheet tells you, just look at the sheet. Then after that, I'm going to go right into base clear, and I'm going to do about 2 medium coats of clear coat on top of that. And after, and then on my third coat, it's going to be real dry because I'm going metallic, and I want them flakes to stand up every which way real nice. So I'm going to dry it up. Just not dry, but it's more of a fog. That third coat. Let it kick off real nice as I go and mix all my clear up and give it, 3 coats of clear coat or whatever I'm going to go with. If everything's going real well, I'm think I'm going to try to slam 4 to 5 coats on that thing. I'm going to flood it down because I'm going to rub, I'm going to color sand it, I guess you could call it. Sand the clear coat with 1,000. Or I don't know what I'll start, 1,500 and work my way up to 3,000 grit, and then do polish it all up to just flatten out the clear coat if I need to. So we'll see when we get there. At least 3 coats. That's kind of a hard video to get out without being hands-on in that stage that I'm talking about. I've been waiting a long time. I've been waiting, I'm like, man, if I get into shaping something up with 40-80 and then prime it, 220 on the polyester, then spray it with 2K, 400, 600 paint, I'm going to do a video on that. But as you may be aware or not, I got toward the finishing stages on this car before I started doing YouTube videos. So I got other cars. I got another one of these second gen Camaros. I got a Trans Am that I want to do. It's an 81 Trans Am. Both of those will be pretty enthralled. So eventually I'll do something like that. But let me know if this video is too long and confusing. Basically doing the best we can here to get something out, write down what I'm telling you. Take notes of what I'm kind of telling you. If it don't make sense, I'll write it down real quick. 40, 80, prime. which is polyester primer. Now, if you don't need to polyester prime it, you ain't got a lot of body work going on, like insane stuff. You might just be like, well, I'm ready. I'm just going to spray it with 2K and block her down with 2K. Okay. Well, I would just, you'd probably go about 220 to, I'd go up to about 220 and then 2K it. Okay. So 40-80 prime. 80 depending on if it's real wavy, using your guide coat. 80 to 220 on the polyester primer. Then after that, 2K it and sand it with 400, 600. And then from there, seal or epoxy. Wet on wet. Paint. Screenshot that. This video might really suck, okay, but I'm just trying to help a friend, and maybe this video would be something he can kind of go through and listen to, take a little more notes or something. But obviously, if you guys personally know me, just call me. I'll help you out. I'm not a professional, but I do okay. Later.